Jérémie Mercier, welcome on to Weird Sauce, and thank you for making time for us and welcoming us from your location. Could you kindly tell us what that location is and also introduce yourself for the audience here on Weird Sauce?
Okay, hi Florence. So my name is Jérémie Mercier. I'm French, but I'm not living in France. I'm actually currently living in Tallinn in Estonia, the capital of Estonia. And I made this decision in October 2020 after being warned 1 month in advance of the exact date of the second lockdown in France. Yes. So actually, it was after an interview of Santa de Poit, who is a Belgian citizen, and she's the president of the European branch of Children's Health Defense, the famous charity, the head of which is Robert Kennedy Jr. And so she's dealing with the European branch of this charity. And I interviewed her because she has lots of crazy information. She kind of knows what's happening everywhere. And after the interview, she told me, "Oh, Jerry, by the way, do you know that the next lockdown in France is on 27th or 28th, I don't remember, October?" I said, "Really?" And that was end of September. And I couldn't believe it. Like, I knew there would be some more crazy stuff because we already had lived the first lockdown in France, which was dementia. I mean, people were really scared and applauding from the balcony every evening at 8 p.m., scared by reading the news, scared by everything, and, like really staying home to save lives. And I was thinking, oh my God, this crazy, like totally got stupid. And I hated this period because I was feeling very lonely, like the only person thinking the way I was thinking as a kind of scientist, I would say. And my kids, so I have two daughters who are now 8 and 12 years old. And at the time, we were not allowed, the schools were all closed for about 2 months. And homeschooling is fine, but I have stuff to do. I don't want to be like a teacher at home. So it was very unpleasant for me. Plus, I have to say, I homeschooled my daughters for 1 year, 2 years before in 2017, which was fine, but it's very, time consuming and very demanding to be a teacher for your own kids. Anyway, so I was thinking, I don't want to do a second lockdown like that in France. So I want to go somewhere else, a place that is kind of free. And I checked to what countries were kind of free COVID-wise in the world or not too far. And surprisingly, there were not many, but there were some. So on my list, they were, we only chose the one in Europe, thinking it would be easy to go there by car and to move our stuff and get ready to settle and have our kids go to school and make friends, etc., etc. And there were only 3 countries in Europe that looked to us kind of free and welcoming. And the three of those 3 countries were Sweden, Estonia, and Belarus. Surprisingly, Belarus, because, in my mind, Belarus is the last dictatorship in Europe. It's the way it's presented. But actually, I think it's the only country in the world that never had any COVID restriction for its citizens. So, which is incredible. And Sweden was very nice as well. And people heard a lot about Sweden. But people rarely heard about Estonia. But when you check at what Estonia did at that time, there was not much stuff that happened. There was a lockdown, but not a real lockdown, because this word means many different things depending on the countries you're in. And for instance, in France, during the lockdown, you were not allowed to get out of your home further than 1 kilometer around your house and more than 1 hour per day. Plus, you had to sign a paper saying what you were going out for and how long, and so what time, etc., etc. And so it's something called a nudge that's pushing you in a kind of direction. And if you didn't have this paper to show to the police, you could be fined 135 euros. I don't know if it happened a lot. I actually only once had to show this to police. I don't remember when actually, but I was driving very far from my home. But anyway, as an independent, as a self-employed person, it's very easy to tick the right box and be able to do whatever kind of. But anyway, it was very humiliating, I think, to have this kind of thing. And I was really pissed with France. And in Estonia, for instance, during the lockdown, basically they closed the shops and some shops and the schools, and that's it. You were allowed to do whatever you wanted outside from that. You could go out anytime. There was nothing to sign. There was no fine for being outside of your home, etc., etc. So we chose in the end Estonia, so the country we're living in right now, because Sweden sounded very administrative to us. Like if you want to have your kids go to a school, if you want to settle properly, you need to get a person number. It's a personal number that you have to apply for, and you only get it after 6 months to a year. So during this time, you cannot really do everything you want regarding the administration. So that sounded quite hard for us. Plus, we wanted to have more, let's say, free time and enjoy the experience of being parents in a new country. And Estonia was very welcoming so there was nothing to do basically. So your kids could go to school very quickly. And so we decided 3 months before moving out from our home in Nantes, in Western France, to this country, Estonia. And I have to say, even now, on the 28th of February, I'm still very happy with this choice. And so my daughters went to the European school last year for a few months, like from November till June, because we arrived just after the beginning of the year. And they enjoyed their experience, even though there were some times where there were kind of lockdowns, and these times schools were closed, so that it was distant learning. But yeah, somehow it worked better, and somehow we had much more freedom than in France anyway. And this year, then I go to an Estonian school, and I mean, it's amazing. There's no mask, nothing. Not like it's normal. It's all totally normal, and it's totally amazing, I think, to have this experience, especially knowing that in France right now, kids from the age of 6 have to wear all day long a mask at school or a muzzle.
Let's take because you're driving very fast on this highway. Let's take a step back and just tell us what you do as a living. You mentioned the fact that you're self-employed, and also you mentioned the word scientist. So this is a very trigger word for a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay.
So why don't you tell us exactly what's your background and what is it that you do, and so this way it will help people frame a little bit the conversation that we're going to have.
So my background is chemistry. I entered a very prestigious and very known school in France called École Normale Supérieure in Lyon, the one in Lyon. And so I did chemistry there. And after that, I was an exchange student in Canada, actually, in Hamilton, Ontario, where at McMaster University for the 4th year undergrad, or the equivalent. Then I came back to France and did some kind of master's in Paris at Ponts et Chaussées, a quite famous school there as well. And then another master in environmental science. And finally, I did a PhD in environmental research at Imperial College in London. And my topic was biofuels, or I prefer to call them agrofuels, because the wording biofuel kind of sound as if those fuels were by sense good for the environment or something like that. So, and actually they're not. But if you use the word agrofuel, which is very neutral, it means just fuels made from agricultural stuff, then it's more neutral, and you can actually dig in it and tell some kind of truth on their real environmental impacts. Anyway, so that's my educational background. And after that, I was a researcher engineer in Paris again, so back to France after my PhD at the Commissariat à l'énergie atomique. So it's like atom energy, and renewable energy center. Let's say it's a very big company outside of Paris, like 10,000 people work there. And so I was, I did some work on a prospect or creating scenarios on the price of some kind of biodiesel by 2030 compared to the price of fossil diesel. And so I did that for a bit less than a year. I got fed up with this company and this topic anyway. And then I started to myself learn stuff about health, which I was already very interested in before, because during my PhD, I actually became vegetarian for ethical and, let's say, environmental reasons. And I wanted to make sure I was making the right choice for myself first, but also for my kids, because I had the plan of having kids with my wife. And the more I searched in that area, and the more I could discover, actually, I was making a very good decision for myself and for my kids. And then I wanted to know more about nutrition, and I did some trainings on that in that field. And then I discovered that health was much more than nutrition. So I wanted to go deeper in other aspects like emotions, and natural health techniques in general. And so I was trained in something more general or holistic, let's say. And I did a training as a health educator at a center quite famous in Florida called the Hippocrates Health Institute in West Palm Beach. And so I did this training in 2013, and I came back there 2 or 3 times, 2017 and 2019, for like kind of reunions and some more learning. And I've seen kind of miracles there, many miracles of people who were supposed to die or of I don't know, cancers or other very serious conditions, and who actually came back there just for holidays many years after they were supposed to die. So that was quite impressive to meet these people, and just by chatting with them, discovering what they did, what did work, what didn't work, and just see with my own eyes that many things are possible. So right now my job is to create online programs in French for people about health. So I teach health. I educate people on health. And it's a fascinating topic because, in most fields, and I'm discovering that every day, but in most fields, what people believe is full of lies, let's say, and the field of health is particularly full of lies. So there's a big work of tidying up and really removing all the crap that was put in this field by, some people say, big pharma or the pharmaceutical industry, whatever, and just get rid of that and really go to the truth, to what really works, what's really good for you. And it's a kind of a hard work, but I love it. It's fascinating. And maybe it's because of this background of being as well a scientist and someone who's open in health, in the topic of health in a very holistic way. Maybe that made me understand from the very beginning, even before the lockdowns, that this COVID thing was totally bullshit.
Right. So that was going to be my next question. I came across you listening to various podcasts from Singapore at the very beginning, I suppose, of 2020, having just got back to Singapore in January 2020. So we already knew that something was on the way, because we as in Singapore responded extremely fast with masks and shut down the borders and so on. But I was obviously, like most people in my field, were looking at understanding what that tripwire was, because we had lived through SARS-1. And SARS-1 was a very good sort of roadmap to understanding early on, and Singapore was very well trained in the medical environment to respond to a SARS-like pandemic. So I came across you interviewing a bunch of people in France, Louis Fouché and all the Info COVID people.
Yeah.
So if people are interested in this, they can go back, because I think there's a bunch of videos that are both historical and current. And then I understood, also listening to other people in the US, that there was a community that was asking questions, and those questions were not really answered. So I'm curious, how did you start tripping over, if I can use this expression, the story of this pandemic, and therefore what led you to start wanting to have conversation about that with other people?
Okay, so in December, or maybe even late November 2019, they started talking about these cases of strange flu and respiratory symptoms. And when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, it sounds like H1N1 in 2009. So it was a big scam. And I think most people understand it was a scam then. So I was thinking, why are they doing the same shit than they did 10 years ago? And days passing by, they start talking about someone being sick in, I don't know, Italy, and then someone in France in the French Alps, and then, oh, this Chinese person who has symptoms in Paris, and then this first death in Paris, and then this lockdown in Italy. And I'm like, what are they doing? This is so stupid. It's happening again. And how can people still believe this shit, kind of? And then there were some elections, local elections in France in March, and they say, oh, we don't know if we can keep them or if we have to postpone them, etc., etc. And Macron was saying someday, oh, everything is fine and under control, and some days, oh, it's terrible, we don't know what's happening. So it was really weird. And from the very beginning, I was like, I can't enter their pandemic propaganda. It doesn't work with me. I know health, I know how it works. We've had this scam already 10 years ago, so I'm not going to enter in it at all. So from the very beginning, I could see it was not the truth. It was propaganda. And when Macron did his speech saying that the day after or at noon, they would a lockdown would start, I heard his speech the first few minutes because I have a hard time listening to him. He's so horrendous to me that I just cannot listen to him. But I managed to listen to the first few minutes, and I heard him saying, "Nous sommes en guerre," which means we are at war. 6 times. Oh my God. I was like, this is such obvious propaganda, such obvious social engineering. I was thinking people will see it and they will not be scared. But no, people were scared and they were really believing we were at war against the virus or whatever. And the people were very scared and thinking we need to do something about it. Oh yes, the lockdown is a good answer, even though there had never been a lockdown before, but somehow it is an answer because someone says on TV it's the answer. And I was shocked to see it. I was totally shocked. And then I could see by myself that the French people were very submissive and very obedient. They were very keen on having their papers signed and even calling the police to say, oh, this person, our neighbor, went out after 8 and the person was not allowed. So please do something about that. Or this person went out twice during the day instead of once. And even the French police had to make official announcements saying, please stop calling us about us. We have too many phone calls. It is crazy. I was thinking I'm living the same situation than people during the Second World War, when some people are denouncing to the police people who are not respecting the law or maybe hiding Jews or whatever. And actually, maybe also I could see this and understand it because actually my great-grandfather on my father's side was Jewish, and he had to hide during the Second World War not from the Germans, but from the French police. Yes, and people forgot about that. But in my family, we know about that because my grandmother told me many times, and she actually she's still alive, and she still makes nightmares of the French police coming inside their house and getting her father. So maybe I was prepared because of that as well. I don't know, but I could see that the police was actually following the orders and checking people and maintaining this kind of a lockdown and pseudo state of emergency for health emergency or whatever. And I was really shocked to see it was happening again. So yeah, from then I started to try to understand and first watch videos of people, of scientists talking about it, especially from the US at first. And then I started reading stuff and papers. And one day, I think it was in May, I read this paper by Denis Rancourt, who's a former professor of physics at the University of Ottawa in Canada, who wrote about a literature review, a state-of-the-art review of the efficiency of face masks against viral respiratory diseases, and the science was extremely clear, and his paper is really interesting. It shows that science says they have no use whatsoever. And that was so shocking because it was exactly the opposite from the official narrative on masks. So I was, wow, that's interesting. I want to talk with him. I want to interview him. And I got in touch with him, and we made that interview, I think on 31st of May, 2020. And I thought it was really amazing. And this video had a lot of views and many comments. I was attacked as well, of course, by those people who were scared and thinking that masks would help us get out of this pandemic and would enable a comeback to something more normal. But of course, it was, as I said, and as I thought from the beginning, a tool of submission and of a continuation of this authoritarianism for fake health reasons.
So from the time that you started, it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me like you started from a scientific interest as well as tried to decode narrative for whatever historical reasons you've already explained that there's some context in which your family was stuck into a narrative and could read through it, and then as a result you probably have this. So you jumped in it as a scientific interest, trying to understand what is the situation. I'm very interested into how then did you go while interviewing more and more people? Did you try to go to the other side, so to speak? And because we're all in this to some extent, I know it's a trite sentence, but we're all in this together. And the fake separation that has been installed is part of the problem in trying to understand something. So scientifically, my wish is always to see how did I get this wrong and how perhaps other people get this wrong. What is that I'm getting it right and what is that they're getting it right? And this way the puzzle gets put back together. So my question is, did you try to see what's happening from the other side? So I'm guessing there's a huge amount of things here. Masks don't work, blah, blah, blah. Then I'm guessing you discovered other things. But what about, were you curious about what's going on in the other side of this equation? What is feeding their perception of what situation we're in?
When you say the other side, you mean the official narrative?
No, yes. I mean, the dominant narrative, both you could see it was not just in France, it was happening at the world level. So were you curious as to trying to reach out those people, trying to read the literature on that front and trying to make sense of why would this be there? What were their basis of belief around that?
Well, as I said, I don't watch much telly because I've understood for many years that it's mostly propaganda or distorted reality, so not very interesting to me. But it's good still to have some kind of, to know what the official narrative is. So every day I would try to, get information from actually reading Le Monde, which is the kind of main French newspaper. And every time I was appalled by the quality of the articles, like very poor, reflection, very low intellectual level, so very basic thinking. So I was very appalled. And I think it's probably been like that for years, but it was not as visible as it was during the COVID stuff. So I kept reading it. And I also read a bit the local newspapers, West France, which is it's a huge regional newspaper. Like, I don't know, maybe it's the first amount of newspapers distributed in France, like maybe 800,000, something like that per day. So it's very big. And it was even worse. I mean, it was terrible. The quality is absolutely appalling. So anyway, I still tried reading it. And sometimes I would go on their Facebook page and make my comments. And I remember people saying, "Oh, you're just such a conspiracy theorist. We can see very well that you don't know what you're talking about. You probably have a very low education level, etc., etc." And people didn't know who I was. I was not, let's say, quite famous at the time. And so it was fun. I just wanted to see, to try and see how people think and react to what I write. And then sometimes I started seeing people saying, "Oh, thanks for saying this. Finally, I see some intelligence, someone clever saying something under the comments of this article on West France." So it was interesting to see. And suddenly I started to see that more and more people were supporting me. And sometimes my comments under the articles of West France were more popular than the article itself. So I had more reactions and much more reactions and much more comments under my comments than under their article. So it was really interesting, and I could see a trend of people starting to open their eyes, understand this was propaganda, and reacting strongly against what was written in these articles of very poor quality. So that was, so for me it's interesting to see what the propaganda say, but I can very easily spot the lies and the ways where they try to distort reality, or they use words that they shouldn't use, or they say, for instance, what was the most maybe disturbing was to hear COVID death. It's so hard to say if someone is died because of COVID or because of another reason. And for instance, most of the old people in March, April 2020 died of COVID. And it's impossible, because suddenly they die of many reasons. And yes, there is a spike in an increase in their mortality, but nearly all of those deaths become COVID. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. And that's why we did this work with Denis Rancourt and Marine Baudin. So we wrote 2 papers that are available on ResearchGate on mortality statistic analysis. And I could see this narrative. And at the same time, I wanted to understand more what's happening, what really is happening. I had my views. I wanted to talk with interesting physicians and interesting scientists as well. So I started making those interviews. I did some before already on many other subjects related to health, but now it was nearly 100% on COVID, because it was such a big scam. I needed some help to show it. And yes, I got in touch with Louis Fouché, who's very famous now, a physician, I would say, in France, because he was an anesthetist in Marseille hospital, and he created this collective, or I don't know how you say that really, like a group of people working together, but it's not even an association or anything. It doesn't have any status, but it's people trying to work together on creating something. And he created this, co-created, I think, this Réinfo COVID collective. And I wanted to talk with him, because I was thinking, oh, finally there's one physician who's saying something that's not stupid about the situation. Finally, there's one. That there were not so many at the time. And I started talking with him, and he wanted to create some content for YouTube and social networks, etc. And I said I would be happy to be the anchor of the broadcast called Science en Conscience, which means science with consciousness. It comes from a saying in French. Science sans conscience n'est que rue de l'âme. It's from Rabelais. It means science without consciousness is a destruction of the soul, or something like that. It's something really bad for the soul. And people know this saying, and I used it in a different way. I just used the very beginning, and I just say science with consciousness, and not science without consciousness, as in the saying. Because I want to show that science without consciousness can deal to really bad stuff. And that's what we've been observing for so long in the health sector. And the climax of that was probably COVID. And if we put back more consciousness, if we remove corruption, if we remove conformism, people trying to conform to the main narrative, then we can have very interesting stuff. But this requires work, and it's hard work, because not so many scientists are actual scientists. And that was actually my discovery during my PhD. In my lab, I had I was very alone somehow, because the way I was describing biofuels or agrofuels was very different from the others. I mean, I got a funding from a French foundation who was, so it was 4 private companies giving money to this foundation. And I discovered after a while that they actually expected some result from me, but some kind of result. And I was thinking in myself that, no, I don't want to give this result. I want to do an independent, objective, scientific research. And that's what a PhD is supposed to be. But the way they were dealing with me was showing that actually they were expecting from me something specific that was along their some of their criteria. For instance, so Total was one of the companies funding the project, and Total is a huge oil company. And of course, they were expecting me to say that agrofuels were good because they were incorporating agrofuels in their fuel to show that they were green and doing something for the environment. And if I tell them that agrofuels are crap, it doesn't work well with what they want to say publicly. So they started hating me and being really mean with me, saying what I was doing was not scientific, etc., etc. But they had no argument at all. And I was alone in my lab because most of the other researchers, they were funded by private companies as well. So they were actually providing those companies with the result they were expecting. So I've seen that from inside, how corruption, it's not corruption like you get some banknotes hidden. It's more that you modify your state of mind so that the way you think will be compatible with what your funding body gives to your research group, something like that. So in the end, it's no more science. It's not science.
It's very subtle psyops. I mean, it's educational or academic psyops.
Yeah, and it's happening everywhere, all fields, not only environmental research, all fields.
So when you discovered this, so there's two questions that comes to mind screaming for me, which I think if I was listening to a conversation, I would love to know. The number one is give us a resume to some extent of what are the most salient things that you've discovered in these past 2 years regarding COVID that you think are primarily wrong or to some level completely wrong or have some element of wrongness. And then the next question, which I want you to think about while you answer the first, is what is therefore your interpretation of why this is the case? Why would this situation of a wrongful explanation, wrongful solution be put into a problem?
Okay. So what I've discovered, the most salient points, well, I would say first that it's very easy to scare people when you use a health pretext, because people don't know anything about health, basically. They just trust. And that's actually a funny thing. Many people have this trust science thing on their Facebook or whatever. And I mean, it's the worst sentence you could think of. You don't trust science. You do science and you don't trust anything. So it's just crazy to put science as a religion. So and it's just totally wrong. It's 100% wrong sentence. But you've seen it many times, and even journalists and politicians say just trust the science. So I've discovered that. Well, no, it's not a discovery, but I've just confirmed the fact that the health sector is probably the most corrupt one. And I would say that physicians in general are the least competent in terms of health. They just know nothing about health. They know about protocols, like how to give some medicine, like how to give some drug, but they don't know health, they don't understand health, and they just believe what they were taught during their university, the studies. And it's very hard to see this, hard to accept, but it's the conclusion of many years in that field and this climax of the COVID thing. So first of all, health is a very important topic people know nothing about, and especially physicians. So that's one thing. And then I discovered, yes, that there is some science, some good science, I mean, and it's very hard to sort the good science from the crap science. And most of the published papers today are just crap, like total crap. It's meaningless. It's garbage science, and that's the majority of papers. It's a lot of jargon and words that look very clever to hide the poorness of the reflection of the authors. And most of the papers you read are written with so much bias that they are meaningless. Like they don't mean a thing. They shouldn't even be read because it's so poor and stupid. So that's it's a very important point. And I think if one day we get out of this situation, we need to clear this field of science, of medicine, and of corruption in general with academia, which is polluting so much the debate. You can't debate actually when in front of you it's not scientists but garbage scientists. It's impossible to debate because you have science on one side and belief on the other side. How can you discuss about beliefs? Who cares? Like, beliefs don't have any value. It's just beliefs. So who cares about beliefs? And so I think that was maybe the most important thing. And then I discovered that yes, face masks are totally useless. And I even discovered that there were some papers, very interesting papers, saying that with the face masks made in fabrics, there was an increasing risk of influenza. That's so interesting. You actually deteriorate your health by wearing those face masks, and even more if it's those handmade fabric face masks. So it's quite fun. And if you go deeper, it's even hard to find evidence that face masks worn by surgeons or dentists are of any use. Even that. So it goes, if you go deeper, you suddenly discover that those things that look like, professional and hygienic, etc., in the end, maybe they have absolutely no use. But okay, let's say more research is required, as they say in most papers. So, and then I discovered that I kind of knew that, but we really worked on that a lot with Denis Rancourt and Marine Baudin, that mortality in northern hemisphere, in the middle latitudes, has a very regular pattern. During the summer, you go to a trough, so it goes down, and then it goes up, and with a peak in the winter around January. Every year it's like that. And it's kind of hard to explain. We don't exactly know the reasons. And the official reason for that is the epidemics of viral respiratory diseases. So flu, basically. But you see this pattern all the time, very regular. And when we hear about, this supposedly new COVID, they were saying at the beginning, we don't know what's going to happen because it's such a horrible pandemic. So it may last for years and we'll have it in summer, etc., etc. But of course, it's kind of hard to lie with this type of diseases because in the summer, very few people have this kind of diseases. So of course, very few people were hospitalized because of COVID symptoms in the summer from the first year, from 2020. And of course it came back after because it's wintertime. And of course you have those symptoms every year. And you can blame it on COVID and say, it's back. It's the second wave or the third wave of whatever. But this image of wave is just stupid because you have this kind of wave every year in the winter. Absolutely. And when we talk about those waves, actually we've had waves. We've had as many waves as humanity has had years of existence. Every winter, there's a wave, increase in mortality and increase in COVID-like or whatever, or viral respiratory-like symptoms. So that was kind of a discovery to me, and it was fascinating to analyze those statistics and publish those 3 papers. And I think there are some groundbreaking results in those papers. And then I would say I'm working more on that now, but I'm not totally clear, so I need to do more research. But I'm even challenging the idea of a virus, because we don't exactly know how virus works, and maybe there's a confusion for some diseases, or maybe for all of them. Maybe there's a confusion between viruses and exosomes. Exosomes being those kind of genetic material produced by cells, showing there's something that the other cells need to adapt to, or saying there is some kind of a problem. And maybe what we call viruses are just a production of those cells, but not infectious agents. And that would make the story totally different. But I mean, I still need to work on that. And there are many clues, at least for some other diseases, that they are not due to viruses, even though that's the official reasons, but maybe mostly due to, I don't know, chemical poisons and sometimes maybe even radiations, etc., etc. So I think there are so many fields we need to explore, and maybe this time of our humanity is amazing because maybe there's a window of opportunity right now to really deconstruct beliefs that we had in the scientific field in general and in the medical field in particular. And what I discovered when the vaccines came out against COVID was that I kind of knew that before as well because I had done lots of research and lots of reading about that. But now it's kind of clear to me that I'm not sure there was ever a vaccine that showed any benefits. So that I'm going very far, but the reading I'm doing is so amazing regarding the history of those injections is just crazy. The deeper you go, and then you realize that those beliefs are based on just theory, fantasies, but not on reality and not on proper science, but on this kind of corrupt science. Actually, I tweet a lot and I write it in French, science, SYANCE. That's the fake science I want to denounce. While the proper science I spelled correctly, SCIENCE. So yeah, and we have to make this. We have to tidy up all this field, and there's a huge work to do. But we need help from good scientists, and I think it's the moment to do that.
So next question then would be, because people would think, in order to address what you just said, I'm really not interested in going into the battlefield of my team versus your team. That is, I think, an argument that's not interesting. What's super interesting is
What's your team?
no, exactly. So whatever the team, I mean, what the team is, as in not your team and my team, the teams in general.
Okay.
So, so what I'm interested is that you brought a number of elements that are easily followable. And therefore, my next question is not a question on what you just said, because I think people should go out and do their homework. Mm-hmm. What I'm clearly very interested is, having done all the stuff that you've done, you therefore must have an explanation or a theory about why is that sort of steel manning of academia into becoming a marketing tool for big pharma, for injection. Why on earth would so much money, effort, people's life? Because if you are a PhD, if you are a researcher and you're trying to do your best, you may or may not know the intent of big pharma. You may not or may not know the intent of your lab. This is your life. This is your life. You're trying to do good science. Maybe in your mind, you're convinced you're doing good science. In other words, why would we have built this Kafkaian-like system in which it eats its own, in which we eat our own? And while we do this, we're also not dealing with the real stuff out there, like cancer. We haven't solved cancer. We haven't taken care of cardiovascular diseases. We haven't taken care of obesity. So we haven't done the stuff that's right under our eyes. We're still not super good at infectious disease also, Ebola and others. And yet we have this enormous apparatus that you seem to describe here and you describe, and that exists in some form or in another because we're in it still after 2 years. So what is your hypothesis? What is your thesis about why should this be there?
When the COVID stuff happened in March, April 2020, I was thinking we enter an era of obvious totalitarianism. And I think we've been in that for actually many years, but it was softer. So you couldn't really tell. You could see, that democracies were not working well. There were social issues that were never addressed. There were problems that were increasing a bit everywhere in our Western democracies, with many quotes. But you couldn't say we were living under a totalitarian era. because it still felt good, well, we kind of felt like we were free to move, etc. And suddenly you're not free to move any longer. You're not free to see your parents, to see your family and your friends any longer. We ask you to upload healthcare workers at 8 p.m. So it did look like a communist or even a Nazi regime. It was a mix between different kinds of totalitarianisms. So, of course, I wanted to understand why this happened. And the most plausible explanation from what I've read is probably that we're maybe operating this fourth industrial revolution and this great reset that some billionaires and very powerful financial forces want us to do. And so maybe we're entering this new era where people will have their digital identity, and where you'll be, and this era where we will have this social credit like they are already doing in some parts of China. So if you're considered a good citizen, then you are allowed to have some kind of rights, while other people who are not considered as good citizens will not be able to do the same things. And it's already happening with the health pass or vaccine passports in many areas. If you are a good citizen who did his or her 2 or 3 shots or whatever, then you're allowed to go to the restaurant, or you're allowed not to have a mask or something. And if you're not a good citizen, then you're not allowed. So we have this social credit already. So it's a very basic one, but it's already, to me, a social credit. And many people in the Western world are very happy to have their QR code and have it flashed, and they can show to the society that they are following, that they are obedient and submissive. And that's the values that our societies are promoting right now, which is very scary to me. And so, yes, I think we're just entering this era, and people have talked about Davos and Klaus Schwab and some billionaires behind all that. Robert Kennedy Jr. made some research as well on that with his team, and he could show that Fauci was a person who's been involved in many scandals before, with AIDS, for instance, and now with COVID and many other problems before as well, probably. And he's just the voice of this big industrial complex that's pharmaceuticals. And I've discovered that from the beginning, the pharmaceuticals have never really cared about health. They just care about selling their products, but they have an excellent, I have to say, their marketing is amazing. With their marketing, they just say that they're saving the world, basically, and people just believe it because billions have been spent in this marketing, so they just believe it. And now, if you are against this belief that pharmaceutical companies are saving the world, then you're seen as a conspiracy theorist. So basically, they managed to do their work very well. And we have to remember that in some other totalitarian regimes, physicians were a key part in it. They were, because it's very easy to segregate people supposedly on their health status, and it's been done in the past. And most of the time, physicians are not able to understand they are being used as a tool for that segregation, because they don't have the critical thinking to do that. So, of course, it's a caricature, but I'm exaggerating. But that's happened in the past, and we still have this state of mind, at least in France, where most physicians were not able to see the scam, and they still continue to diffuse this propaganda, and in a very naive way. And when will it stop? So yeah, I think we're operating this shift and entering this era of maybe more artificial intelligence, social credit, mass surveillance, and a society where there are some good citizens who have many rights and freedoms, so, if they did the right thing, and where the other people are not considered as proper citizens. We'll see. But it's what's happening right now.
So, in relation to this, because we've just described one crisis, and before we close, and I would like you to close with, what would you recommend people do for themselves? Again, with this idea of ignoring teams. I'm not, I think that's been so bad for everybody to think.
Yeah.
because we are the product. So either way, the lasers of whoever were directed towards us, and we responded with whatever amount of skills and equipment and availability of information and resources we've had. So I would like you to conclude later on what would you recommend people do so that they navigate this, regardless their sense of where they are, because in the end of the day, this is your health, this is your life, this is your body. So you're gonna have to navigate this. It's not just a narrative. But before we go to that, I would just like to ask you as a flag posting. So we just described 2 years, lots and lots of discovery of a situation, which was a public health situation, a medical situation. We're now, just as you said, the date for the recording of the podcast, at the recording, we're now entering another issue, which is a geopolitical conflict. And we don't know if it's going to get even bigger than it is, but it's already big, all right, for a lot of people who are living next to where you are, for Europeans, etc. So knowing what you've just gone through with COVID, how is this informing what you're reading about in this geopolitical situation? How are you reading this current situation, especially considering that you're not in France, you're in Estonia right now, which is a neighbor country
Absolutely.
to both Ukraine and Russia?
Well, Ukraine is actually quite far, but Russia is
Yep.
only 200 kilometers from here. So basically, a jet from Russia would be here in 10 minutes or less. I don't know, but it would be very quick. Sometimes before this happened, I was kind of joking about that, saying that if Russia wanted to invade Estonia, it would take about 15 minutes. But maybe I'm exaggerating, but that was my kind of joke. Actually, but I do love being in Estonia, and I really like this country where the 70 something percent of the people are Estonians speaking Estonian, and 25% plus are Russians, and things are happening pretty well. Until now, I thought that there were very little tensions and people could get along pretty well. And I like hearing those two very different languages and seeing that people seem to be okay living together and enjoying their life as a country that's no longer part of the USSR. Of course, keeping a very vivid memory of it because they only got their independence in 1991, so that's only 30 years ago. But I'm under the impression that the fact there are so many Russians, ethnical Russian in this country, is helping this country being not really totally a Western country. And I think it's very helpful. And people resisted more to the COVID propaganda in this country than in many other countries. And maybe that's why the rates of vaccination is quite low compared to many neighbors countries. So it's like 63% for double vax, which is, to me, it's of course too high, but it's still pretty low compared to Finland or even Latvia, which is just south, and even compared to Sweden, where there was no coercion whatsoever. And here there was some coercion against people and pushing for vaccine, but people resisted somehow. Anyway, so for right now, so there is this. So now everybody talks about Ukraine, of course. I was very surprised that these attacks happened from Russia to Ukraine. But at the same time, I could see from the very beginning, I was thinking, what are they doing? Why is NATO and the EU pushing for this war? They were just, accelerating as if they just wanted this war. They were intimidating, threatening Russia, etc., etc. That was very weird, I thought. So now there is this reaction from Russia, which is kind of scary, of course, but at the same time, I can see maybe it's even easier now to spot the propaganda from let's say the NATO, US, CIA team, or I don't know how to call it, or Davos as well, Davos. But I mean, you see all those presidents and prime ministers from the Western world who had no problem locking down their people, removing their freedom, censoring, etc., etc., and now talking about freedom, about Ukraine, now talking about being all together when the only thing they tried to do was to divide the population. So I'm like, doesn't make sense. Of course, it's bollocks what they're saying. So to me, this propaganda saying we stand with Ukraine is really appalling once again. It's showing this situation in a very biased way once again, and very childish as well. And I understand that people in Ukraine can be scared, and it's kind of wrong what's happening, even though, to my understanding, the Russians are mostly attacking army stuff and weapons, weapon storage stuff. They are not attacking the population, but still it's scary, and you can never know what's going to happen. If a bomb doesn't fall the right place, well, you're killed. So it's not. Of course, it's scary, and there are actually many Ukrainians. It's a quite important minority in Estonia as well. So I visited a bit the center of Tallinn, and I live very close to the Russian embassy, so I could see what it's like. And I saw there was a huge demonstration on the Freedom Square in Tallinn this weekend on Saturday, and it was huge, and it was, I would say, sadly huge, because people didn't do such high demonstrations apart from once to fight for their own liberty, for their freedoms in this country, in Estonia. But this time it was huge because the media and the politicians were pushing for this demonstration. And there was even a talk by the Estonian president at this demonstration. You see? So all the propaganda was pushing for people to get outside, get their Ukrainian flag, and write fuck off Putin, fuck yourself, or whatever. It's kind of weird to see that written in many places, and including in front of the Russian embassy. I understand it because people are scared. I understand because this country was part of the USSR and they suffered a lot. Many people have had relatives that were sent to the Gulag, who were killed there, who died in Siberia or whatever. So it's a very big trauma, and I can understand it. But I'm thinking the situation today is very different. And I see very clearly this propaganda from NATO and the EU especially. And it's scary. And I don't know how far it can go. But somehow I feel very good in Estonia, and I don't fear any problem. So I'm. People have asked me, "Oh, will you move somewhere else?" But not at all. I'm feeling very good here. I don't see why there would be any attack against Estonia or anything. So, and I would even say in Tallinn there are 50% Russians nearly, so 40 to 50%. Why would Russia attack Tallinn? It doesn't make sense. So anyway, so I'm feeling very safe here, and I don't fall in this game of divisions and propaganda from NATO and the EU. Yeah.
Right. So to conclude this, and of course, in the link of the episode, we'll have all the ways in which people can connect with you, can understand what you do, can read the material that you publish, including your articles. So I encourage them to have a look at that. But to conclude, I would like to leave people on this note of a roadmap. It's sort of a guide through the darkness and through the fear and through the anxiety, because in the end of the day, we're all human, Russian, Ukrainian, French, American. We're on this small little planet. We are seemingly trying to create difference that are seemingly not there, or that don't need to be there. So if you have tools, if you have access to knowledge, and if you have guidelines, what would those be for people who are listening?
Okay, so I have to say it's not very easy to answer this question because so myself, I've learned a lot regarding health for about 15 years. And I've learned a lot during my PhD about the lies from politicians and from the industry in general. So it's more easy for me to spot when there is a lie, when the truth is modified to help some agenda. But you don't have to do all this work to see that there's something wrong. And I would say that every time someone wants to scare you, you have to think, oh, maybe this person or this institution wants to manipulate me, because scaring people is the best way to manipulate them. When you're scared, you don't have any power over yourself. You just give back your power to this authority that's scaring you. And we've had that for many years, for instance, in France with the terrorist attacks and all that. So we've lived in a country where people have been scared for a long time in France. So yeah, so I teach actually techniques to get rid of emotions that are like parasites on you and that you need to get rid of. And to me, I mean, expressing your emotion through your body, but there are kind of protocols to do that, and I do them sometimes, and I love it. But even not you don't even have to know how to do that. That's my personal thing, and I also have those people who do it now because I taught them. But just, I mean, there were many demonstrations in many countries, and I think they have very little political power. That's very unfortunate. But in Berlin, for instance, in August 2020, 2 million, or between 1 and 2 million people demonstrated in the streets. No result, nothing at all. Because, I mean, it's totalitarianism. They don't care about people. And they just want us to be divided. And 2 million is not enough, which is crazy. But those demonstrations are a place where you can meet people. When you can meet like-minded people who are thinking there's something wrong, I don't know what I can do, I feel alone, but I'm at this place, and I think this kind of place is a great place to network and find new friends or people you can visit or people you can talk to when you feel there's something wrong or when you feel alone as well, because the totalitarianism divides people, and they even inside families, inside couples, inside workplaces, it divides people, and this way it can be more powerful. So by gathering to these demonstrations, you can at least meet people and create more links when everything wants you to get rid of those links. So I think that's a pretty interesting place to do things. And it's also very important, I think, not only to rely on those technologies like what that we're using right now, but it's helpful because yes, it's great, we can talk together, but meeting people in person, physically, is more important. And I have my network here in Tallinn of French people and Estonian people, and I'm happy to have those friends and people I can talk with. And it's extremely important right now where everything is made for you to stay at home and stop being with other people. And we need to get back to this humanity. We are social animals. We need interactions, and we need to see people for real. The screen is not enough. And that's very important. And I would say now that every time, so I thought about institutions or media or people trying to scare you. When that happens, I think you have to really have something in your brain happening, telling you, be careful. If this person or this thing is trying to scare you, stop it and take some insight and look at what's happening. And I think every day you have to make this work of trying to remove yourself from the propaganda, because sometimes we can't see it's propaganda, of course, and most people don't even see it's propaganda. But still, you have to make this work of thinking, is this the truth? And you have to become a truth seeker somehow. You have to make this work, because if you don't do it, you will just get this propaganda and think it's the truth and be totally under it and unable to see what's true, what's wrong. And this is the fight of the time. I think it's a fight for light and truth, but we have to do it, all of us, at our personal level. And it's hard, but it's very valuable, and it gives good result in your life. You will get this freedom this way, I think. So yeah, that would be my advice.
And finally, Jérémie, as I ask all my guests on this podcast, and thus the title of the podcast, what is your weird sauce for life? What's the recipe that you apply to your life to make it worth it and sustainable and enjoyable?
I think my weird sauce would be to have fun somehow, whatever happens, and live your life as a game or as an adventure. So for us, for instance, it was crazy and okay at the same time, and very joyful to move from France to Estonia, a country we had never been to before. So, and we just crossed Europe. It took us 2 days and a half, and it was magical. We were with our 2 kids living this adventure, and even today, every day is an adventure. I don't know what's going to happen, and I discover so many things every day, and I love it this way. So I think this joyful state of mind and thinking your life is a game or an adventure is very important.
Jérémie Mercier, thank you so much for this conversation. We wish you to be well. We wish you to enjoy and to be joyful, and also to be, of course, doing what you love.
Thank you very much, Florence.
If this conversation stopped you in your track, share it with your network. You never know whose life you might change for the better. Thank you for listening. Stay curious about our next guest and stay curious about life.